Thanks for joining us, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We realize we talked quite a bit, so we used our entire time. And I'll just start off with introductions. My name is Annabel Cholico. I'm the scholarship director with Seattle Colleges, and I have the privilege of working.
Hello, I'm Jasmine Meraz. I am one of the scholarship managers, and Whitney Nelson, who's administrating back there, is our newest scholarship manager, 2 weeks in. So
yeah, she's
excited to have her. She's learning with you all.
Awesome. So we administer scholarships for the 3 colleges across the district: Seattle Central, North Seattle, and South Seattle College. On average, last year we received 1,200 submitted applications. We had 3,000 or so applications that were started, but 1,200 were submitted, and out of those, we awarded 513 students. We aim to award students at least a $5,000 scholarship, but we average, I think, somewhere between 4,300 to 4,700. We're really lucky to be able to say that although we're in this climate, this changing climate with who you can and can't serve directly or indirectly, we are really lucky to be able to say that 80%, almost 80% of our campus is first generation or students of color. So by default, we will serve these populations through our scholarship application process. Earlier, we heard Victoria from Stolen Reeves talk about affirmative action and how it is that we got here. And she is the attorney, and they are the firm that we learn and keep learning a lot about. The reason why this became such an important topic, our team first started 2023. I work in cycles, so in my mind, this is my 3rd year with the foundation. Carrie, our leader, had already done some work around this, and when we started, she kind of hinted this was going to pick up. And we had neighbors and folks in our community that had started to receive OCR complaints. So I felt like it was my responsibility as a scholarship director to really become aware and informed of what this meant. And I felt like it was my responsibility to be sure that we were compliant and to lessen the risk of an OCR complaint at Seattle Colleges. Our starting point was learning, reading, getting all of the information that we could from our colleagues, our partners, but most importantly, we attended the National Scholarship Providers Association conference. Has anyone here been to an NSPA conference? I highly recommend it. It consists of scholarship providers across the nation. When we went in 2023, we knew that some of the topics were going to be around affirmative action. So we took that as an opportunity to become familiar with what other institutions were doing. Were OCR complaints really happening or not? And how were they approaching the situation? We needed to have all of that information before taking any action on our end and ensure that we just had a good, full understanding. So I joked earlier, I said NSPA should sponsor us because I'm putting a plug in for 2 of their upcoming conferences. So I take it very seriously for our scholarship managers to participate in anything that they offer. You pay for a membership, there's a platform, there are forums that are happening on there with conversations around affirmative action and what folks are doing. They have a virtual conference that is happening next week, $79 per each member. But their annual conference is what you really want to go to, because that's actually where we met Stolen Reeves. We stalked Penny, the partner attorney, there until the very end of the conference. It was, and we'll share what we learned. So Whitney and Jasmine will be going to Atlanta in October, and they'll bring back information to our team. And that's how we stay on top of what's happening in our scholarship world. So we went to NSPA. We were eager to learn about anything and everything that was happening in the scholarship world. We met Stolen Reeves there, and there was a presentation that focused on laws, taxes, and ethics in scholarships. We gasped. I heard people gasp today when Victoria was up here sharing things that maybe should or shouldn't be happening, and that was our reaction when we heard Penny present. And the next few slides are takeaways that we brought back to our foundation and really thought these were critical takeaways that we needed to address within our foundation. Donor participation was one of them. We had historically interview committees where donors would bring their family members and they would cherry pick their scholar. We learned that that couldn't happen because it actually affects their tax deduction. There was actually an IRS code around that. And I thought, wow, well, we have a few of those. We also learned that donors couldn't make up their committee. And in the past, and being new, I felt like I was being handled by donors. They would say, these are my 4 family members, print out the materials from Award Spring, give them to us in paper copy, and we want to interview the candidates. I go here and I learned that that's actually not ethical. The committee needs to be appointed by the foundation. So if the donor brings 4 family members, the foundation is responsible for bringing 5 additional reviewer members. So you would have a total of 9. They needed to be compliant, they needed to follow a rubric, and they needed to follow the instructions through Award Spring. I couldn't just print out copies for them any longer. They are also making a recommendation. You as a foundation make the decision, and that was something that wasn't happening. So we brought that back, and that was really hard to discuss, and it still is, and it's an ongoing process. I think something that is always going to be a topic is restrictions and requirements. What could we base a fund and gift agreement on? What are characteristics and requirements that are acceptable that don't put you at risk? But and I'll talk about it later, the amount of risk that there is when implementing certain restrictions. But we learned that restrictions should be broad enough so that they can live long enough. So you don't have to constantly go back and change those gift agreements and fund agreements and talk to the donors. So you want to help donors create gifts with restrictions that are legal, clear, and sustainable. And if you don't, you end up having their pot of money just sit there because you can't administer it. Huge takeaway, it's been ingrained in my mind since 2023, is focusing on setting your restrictions to be acquired versus inherited. So acquired, I can be a student in a particular student club, I can participate in a certain course, I can also be from a certain geographic location, a zip code, a certain high school, be pursuing a certain area of study, versus it being inherited, born into it. So that's one takeaway that we constantly share with fundraisers. When you have that conversation, help donors lean towards acquired characteristics. So things that we have to be mindful of right now are the race and the gender. I'll give an example. We have a current scholarship that's being worked on, and the donor wanted to serve a woman who was pursuing culinary. And I told Tracy, who was working on this, may be good for us to do a little bit of research on how many women students there are in the culinary program. Let's broaden that up and be sure that this can live for a long time versus being super specific. So it's something that we're learning to implement as we go. There are constant changes. I think when I heard Victoria speak today, she alluded to maybe not being able to ask citizenship or residency status, and I thought, okay, that's gonna be my next category that I have to tackle and review in fund agreements. So we're at NSPA and everything, it just seemed like there was red flags being thrown all over the room for us and things that we needed to be aware of. But we learned that you need to assess the risk at all times. You cannot get comfortable, especially right now with all of the constant changes. You have to be on top of these changes and how you're administering and what you are administering. And we learned that there is no such thing as no risk. There is high risk, there's medium risk, and there's low risk. Last year, I may have been willing to take some medium high risk because we weren't sure what was gonna happen. This year, I'm very adamant about taking very little risk, so making everything low risk. What was also ingrained in my mind is that what your scholarship administrators do, what your foundation does, can look presentable and it can be clean on your web page and your application. So if there's someone looking to see if they can make a complaint against you and they can't find anything on your website, great. But the attorney shared with us then, if you receive an OCR complaint and they come and they pull the curtains back, what are you doing behind the curtains? And at that time I was like, well, we're doing interview committees. I think I still have some fund agreements. So you have to think about it that way in order to mitigate your risk. What are you doing to the, that's open to the public eye, but you also need to think about what you're doing behind the curtains because that could put you at really high risk for an OCR complaint. We didn't know who to turn to. We knew we needed to turn to the institutions and see what they were going to do. They have more protections, of course, than we do, but they were someone that could model examples for us. So, of course, learning from our colleagues at each college and also just having a conversation. But in order to assess the risk, we were gonna have to come back and read every single agreement. And that can feel daunting depending on how many you have, and we have over 200. So we needed to start somewhere. So the steps that we took, that we implemented when we came back from the conference. We came back and we informed our entire team and our leadership. Carrie, again, amazing supporter. She had already done some work in this area, so she understood. She briefed us on what was coming to us and the work that we were going to need to do. But we had to inform, and especially our fundraisers and everyone else that's part of the foundation. A lot of times it would feel like no one believed the severity of this. It was like, yeah, that's happening, but it's not happening here, and it's not happening to us yet, so we don't have to worry. And it's like, well, we need to start having the conversations. So really bringing back the information to your team, sharing with your team information that you've even learned here today. Like, take it back to your spaces and stress the importance of it, because you don't really know if you're safe or not. We're walking on eggshells essentially. And I felt that way for us. Like, if someone in my backyard just got an OCR complaint, are they gonna come knocking on our door next? The first step we took is we dismantled interview committees. We came back that year and we said we cannot give you special privilege and have these interview committees where your family gets to interview folks, and we moved to a reading committee instead. And Jasmine can speak to what the reading committee looks like now.
Yeah, so essentially the reading committee looks the exact same way as our regular reviews would look. It's just another look to the student's application and all of the items are blinded except the graded statements. So they're only accounting for the statements, and that's based on like the qualifications. If they wanted someone who was wood tech, and that's who the donor is, we would look for our high achieving 90 percentile students who scored 25 out of 25 points, and they had also indicated they were wood tech. They would get another set of eyes on our reading committee. So not only would we read them as the foundation team, theirs would as well, but they wouldn't know what the student's name is, they wouldn't know what GPA they've had or their level of involvement. It's just their grade statements.
The next few steps that we took is we discontinued administering scholarships. At one point, we administered scholarships for an outside entity, and we learned that there's risk when you don't own the fund agreements and the gift agreements or that pot of funding. So to mitigate the risk, we had to discontinue administering anyone else's. We only administer our scholarships, what we hold the fund agreement for and the dollars for. And we stopped promoting external scholarships. And this is really hard. I'm sure you all experience this, where folks will email you and say, can we promote this scholarship to all your applicants as well? We have staff and faculty who will ask for the list of all of the applicants because they want to send them lists or scholarships to healthcare or aeronautics, whatever it may be. And we don't promote anything that doesn't belong to us because we don't know how they administer and if there are any areas of risk. For example, you could promote a link to Coca-Cola and they could be looking to just award an African-American male. Well, you would be responsible for that action. So we do not promote. It's something that we're trying to figure out, how do we still get information to students? So if we meet with them via Zoom, we verbally share. You can look at these outside agencies. There's also a team called Funding Navigators at Seattle Colleges, and each college has one funding navigator assigned, and their goal is to piece a student's funding plan for the next 4 or 5 years. We're not sure if they have more protection than we do, but we know they meet with students and they're talking to students about how to fund their time at Seattle Colleges. So we send them information and they share that in some shape or form. I was talking to someone in here earlier and wondered, well, could you, instead of putting it on a web page, put it on a printed piece of paper and distribute that way? I'm not sure, and it's a follow-up question that I have for Stolen Reeves as well. Reviewing the gift agreements and fund agreements was the starting point for us. We needed to know what we were working with, like what is putting us at high risk, medium risk, low risk, what is there, what do we own? And I do this every year, but every year before our cycle opens, and it's open right now, I read every fund agreement because there are so many changes that I have to be sure I catch those. Of course, there may be a better way that you can track, there may be platforms, but I sleep better if I go and read all of those fund agreements and work with fundraisers and say, you know what, this year there's like 2 more that I hope you can edit with the donor. I think sharing the news of all of these changes has been the hardest part because of the donor piece, and they tend to receive the news differently. And Tracy and I, Tracy's our executive director of Plan Giving, we've worked very closely on talking points, how do we coach other fundraisers, and I've joined Tracy for some of the conversations with donors because that's what follows after you after you identify your problematic fund agreements, then you may have to start a conversation with the donor. So I wanted to pitch this time to Tracy to maybe share some challenges and what that experience has been like.
Each time is different, so who here is gonna be the one like you're talking to the donors, like, about the change. Pretty much everybody. Yeah. So we have, I'm going to take us back. We had the committee piece. We had 15 of donor arrangements that were made, allowing them to have, let's just say we called it at the time making recommendations, but the reality is they were actually choosing. So there were 15. We whittled that down to 4. We are no longer offering what she described as the backup plan, which is now this reading committee, which is where there's more foundation members than donor selected. We don't offer that anymore. It is truly the way to address the 4 that we couldn't get them to agree to allowing the general review process to take hold. And what that brings to mind, because now we're segueing into a whole other set of conversations, is this, and I sometimes, people who know me, I can be a little alarmist and I worry a lot. And so I would get really seriously prepared for these conversations that I thought were going to go bad within seconds. And the reality is, you really should not assume how that's going to go. And I was, in the end, surprised by those who it was easy for and shocked by those that it was really difficult for. And so it was just like, damn, you just gotta like, don't frame it from the beginning is what I learned. And then it leads me right into listening to what they're really saying and talking less. So I was obviously aware, had all the information in my head, but the fact is in the end it's going to be a conversation about trying to meet what their true needs are. And there might be a little more wiggle room than you think. And so if you can get them articulating what it is that their intention was, what their goal was. I know I'm sounding Pollyanna right now, but the reality is in the end these were often, once done, they could actually be okay with the process. They still got to see the scholarships that they knew matched their particular criteria. The general review process are randomly assigned. So the ones that were struggling got that option and then got to see, and I think the comfort zone increased. But what I would say is, it's more about listening. I would say this, that as we move into this second phase, we've identified 40 funds that involve race, ethnicity, gender, all of this. And what are we at? 75, 80, you said 200, I don't know how many scholarships we have. We have like 400 funds, so.
We have over 200, we have 70 that we identified, 45 that we.
Yeah. All of these conversations ideally would take place by April 9th, which is our deadline. What that means is, whereas with the reading committee conversion, we went on verbals. If we knew we got to the point where the donor was okay with it verbally, even if we didn't get the written gift agreement, we were okay because we were going to keep tackling that. In this instance, we are not giving dollars out unless the gift agreements are actually, changed. I want to speak a little bit about roles. Different places have different number of staff who will handle this differently. Annabel mentioned, it's true, she and I would work together on some of these conversations. There are also some that I did on my own. It wasn't a given, it really was very specific, and it was about the relationship. And to that end, what I guess I would offer is this. We're all invested in this, but I saw it as a fundraiser-driven thing, because if you're donor-centric, as a foundation-centered, the relationship is what was going to get us through this, and so that was who handled that conversation. We have some donors who go the distance and ask very particular, specific questions about how we award and numbers and all this stuff, which I wouldn't be able to speak to, and those were the times that I brought Annabel in. I bring this up because it's not it wasn't a given for us, because we have very personal value systems that are at play when it comes to fundraisers and donors and the institutional needs. And so this was a very deliberate position that I took, and then so much so that I found myself, because fundraisers tend to be relational, and so I would find myself sometimes feeling overly apologetic about it, picking a position from the very beginning as if I can't believe I'm here. I would go at great lengths, as if that was creating comfort. It did not create comfort. It caused more anxiety, and I would go further. I believe it was disrespectful. I'm not saying this because I had a couple attempts at these things, and so my approach sort of shifted over time. What I say is the most respectful is to be super clear that it is not a negotiation on certain things. And so if you go in there thinking it is, and they think that they have the ability to wiggle or move or whatever, it's not going to be productive, and in fact, I think ends up being more negative. So the idea is to describe clearly what the institutional alignment is with the foundation around why, in very descriptive ways, very descriptive. I literally lifted language from what the attorney, you'll see a bit of it later, you know, how we got there, what's the definition that we're operating off of, and I made sure Carrie bought off on that before I went and had the conversation. So it was literally describing what we were able to do, what we were not able to do. You have a scholarship policy, but I don't think it goes there. Sorry?
We do have.
So basically, where was I at? I totally lost my point. No. So back to the listening more, trying to have them come out with share more about what their values were and seeing if we could get there, but there were definitely non-negotiables, and the best I could do is describe it and not as apologetic. I'm going to give you an example. It hits on almost every single thing that we've been talking about. There's a scholarship, and it is a family who started this because their nephew died a violent death at a very young age, who was a student at Seattle Central College. African-American male, they started, I'm sure you have a scenario similar, started a memorial scholarship. His family was very active in their community, Seattle-based for many, many years, hosted several fundraisers over a period of about 10 years. They raised $100-some thousand, they're up to about 120 right now. Multiple donors gave to this as a key. Multiple donors gave to this fund. The signer of the gift agreement were 6 family members. They wanted to honor his death in a way where African American males attending Seattle Central would be able to benefit. And the conversation started because they were let's just be real, they were choosing who got their scholarship. They had this arrangement whereby we provided materials, it was only family members who chose it, so the initial conversation started there. We had to dismantle this committee. We listened to what they wanted to accomplish, and the conversation went in about 3 different tangents. 1, they were also upset at the same time that it appeared when they got the thank you notes from students that they were, the students would identify as African American in most cases, but in fact they would be, according to her definition, African descent. They were not looking for African descent, they were looking for African American. So that is one piece, which literally sent me going to get statistics from the institutional effectiveness folks to see how students were identified in general who attended Central. She didn't like that, because the fact is we're not double checking how students identify. We believe they have a right to identify how they want. And it was a difficult, again, donor clear on what they wanted, but that was not something that we could meet. I could give her statistics, I could describe things to her, but it wouldn't necessarily meet. So then when it came to the likelihood of trying to zero in on her population, her target that she was trying to reach, we offered, Annabel, thank you, what about students that are enrolled in Emoja, students that are enrolled in Project Baldwin? These are mentoring programs that are specifically designed, at least initially were, African American males. So increasing the likelihood that you would then have students who would actually reach that. She declined, in part because there were Africans who were also participating in this service. And I would venture to say now, they're already changing their language because these too are programs that are being hit by what's going on right now. So it's not as if that would be a lasting solution anyway. She declined. We then offered, and I forgot about this, EDIC folks being, we trying to get the composition of the reviewers rather than foundation, which we are mostly white, have the second review the augmented staff members. Remember saying like 4 family members, 5. Those would be from the EDIC. She declined that. It's because we were trying to, think about who was choosing and trying to. And zip code was also offered. So we went through, we did the reading committee, right, with the foundation honoring it. And then we're going to segue here to another problem. We got through that one. They want their students to participate in their fundraising events because they are starting their own foundation. Do you know who I'm talking about? Yeah. they're starting their own foundation, and in the effort, so that it took them years to establish a nonprofit, so they wanted the students to come because they knew that their fundraising would be better if they did, which is when we had to communicate to them that was putting the risk at risk. The student would have to claim that as income, the award that they were given. I mean, I'm telling you, we've gone everywhere. And now we are going back with the African American male situation, where we landed with this. This is what's going to be offered, it's what's going to be described, and that is underrepresented. It is, you cannot specify our risk tolerance that we've chosen as an institution that aligns with the foundation and that the institution is underrepresented, and that is essentially bundling all folks who would fall by gender, by race, ethnicity, disability, veteran status, that sort of thing. I fully expect her to decline this, and then we don't know where we're going to be at. Going back to how all those donors were involved, I don't believe it's an option to return the funds transfer their funds to their newly established foundation. They have a foundation, they've raised dollars that are now going exclusive to that, and they can choose their own risk tolerance, but we cannot. So here we have $130,000, which may or may not be distributed if we can't get the gift agreement signed. And that's just one example. You know, I think every conversation is going to be different, but we have about 39 others. You know, so sorry, I think I talked longer than my
And what Tracy shared, that example, that also led us to think about, well, because I'll add to that, when we first tried the reading committee with this particular group, they received their list of students, again, back to the point that they only wanted to serve African American, not African. They received their list of students to read through, and they said, well, 14 of these last names don't seem to be African American. So there's really only 3 students in this pool that would match. And that led us to think about the bias that takes place in the reviewer world when you're reading applications, and also what changes we needed to make to our applications so that, again, all students are eligible, but there isn't any additional bias happening. So Jasmine, who's our Award Spring guru, will share with you the changes that have been made alongside these affirmative action changes.
Does anyone here use Award Spring or know what it is? Okay.
Do you love it?
You're like, good.
You love it?
Okay.
We'll have to learn from you.
Yeah. Award Spring and I are besties now. All right. So I inherited Award Spring from our consultant who used to work for the foundation as well. I had 2 weeks to learn it before the cycle happened, so I did it all within that time, and then every summer now I just kind of embed myself into the system. And so some of the things that we did in the application that obviously we've changed year by year, cycle by cycle, is blinding items, which is a great tool on Award Spring that essentially blinds everything other than what you want. And so what we did is everything is blinded except the written statements. So that's the only thing that in these reading committees would be separate from any other review of the general scholarship pool, is that. It's just another set of eyes. They're still getting their high candidates within the program or whatever they're looking for, but everything else is blinded. And I say this because I use the example that my fiance is Muslim. He grew up Muslim. He doesn't practice Islam, but he has an Arab-sounding name, but he is Cambodian. And so there is a lot of judgment that comes with the name and the last name or the religion or whatever it may be, and we were noticing the same kind of trend that often students who were of particular religions or backgrounds were often getting pointed out and not included because it didn't fit in that specific criteria. And so we removed that because we're going to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Of course, we can't stop students from mentioning it in their written statements because, again, that is their written statement, is their story to tell. But we do try to give them pointers as how to write them without telling them how to write the written statements. We also removed 1 written statement from our section. So before we had 3, we had a purpose statement, a personal statement, and a financial need statement. We removed the financial need statement because the assumption is every student is in some level of financial need. Every student, obviously, who is applying is in some level of need. We don't account for FAFSA or WASFA as part of the application. We do ask it for reporting purposes because it's something that obviously the college wants to know how many students are versus not applying, but it's not a conditional to applying to our scholarships. The other thing that we changed was, obviously, Annabel mentioned, was the donor reviews. And so I go into the system and make sure that if they have 3 committee members, we have 4. I will always be a part of most of them. Annabel will do whatever the other additional may be, but I usually am the one who reads more than everybody else. My first year I did about 100 applications by myself. Everyone else does anywhere from like 10 to 15 at most. And so we also make sure that all of our students get at least 3 reviews in our general cycle. And so if reviewers come and say, hey, I actually have to like drop out because I have other commitments, or I can only review up to this date, I will either reassign them to someone else, usually our foundation team, it takes precedent, or I will just add them to my load. I am a pretty quick reader. I've read enough that I get the gist of how to do it. But I usually put it on myself and not on other reviewers, unless reviewers come and say, hey, I finished early, can you add more? Then of course we can add more. The other thing that we did is the outreach to these programs. And so of course, while we can't necessarily say we want this pool of student, we can outreach to all of these programs that may fit that criteria of some level, right? So outreaching to student government, student leadership, student clubs and organizations, programs like TRIO, who may have other clubs and organizations who say, oh, we have this other club that we have 1 student in TRIO or NSAP that's also a part of, or they're involved in this thing, specifically in West Seattle or in Capitol Hill, whatever it may be. And so that's kind of where we have gotten into that point, is making sure that we outreach.
I'll add to the outreach piece. Last year and this year, we've also, with the help of our communication team, are promoting to certain newspapers and news media outlets from different communities, Hispanic community, Asian American community, and our Black community in Seattle. We've been able to get a time on air and on the newspaper and on their blogs. So we're doing the outreach to the folks that we can't say we're serving, but we're figuring it out.
And then as for the post-acceptance, which obviously comes after the awarding, is making things non-conditional. So that means things are no longer required, but they're optional. So this means the thank you letter, which I know may upset some donors, but it is technically, from what we got from legal counsel, you're creating a condition on the scholarship, and we can't do that. And so it's still an option for the students who want to do the thank you, and most still do. It's very rare that we get students who don't do it, but it's no longer a requirement. Instead, what we're requiring is a student bio that still tells us the story of who the student is, what they're studying, what they're pursuing, without giving a full thank you letter. They also have a photo that's also optional if they want to promote it, and then their level of involvement. This is something that we have been working back and forth with to figure out how to kind of determine level of networking and socializing between the donors and the scholarship recipients. And so we have 4 categories for students to choose their level of involvement. This could be, they're okay with socializing or going to events where donors will be there. They're okay with publications of their story to whatever publication outlets we may be doing, whether that's interviews or video recordings or other forms of media. We have ones where they're okay with telling their story, but they want to remain anonymous. And then we have, they don't want any level of involvement. And so usually if the communication team or someone within our team wants some information of the student, we look into that and say, the student declined all options, or the story's okay, but they would like to remain anonymous, so we are not going to outreach to say, hey, can you do this video where you show your face and you say your name, right? And so all of that we've changed, and we're still changing as we're going through. Award Spring, I know, has some limitations, and so that's why I said when we're besties, we're doing our best to figure out what we can do on our end and what they can and can't do. I know they're going to go through another upgrade in the summer. I don't know what changes those will be, but they've started to mention some of them. And so as things change, we're also changing things. We're able to hide things that are imported from TTC. So if that's something you're also looking forward to, you can hide things from the student. So this information will still get imported into the system, but the student won't see it on their application. And so if the student is like, I don't get this question, but it's not a question that they necessarily answered, it was imported from CTC, you can hide the item so it doesn't prop into the student application. And that we just learned a couple weeks ago before the application.
References?
Oh yes, we also removed references from the application. we noticed that a lot of students, that actually was hurting them more than it was helping them, and it was creating a large bias between students who didn't have references and those who did, and then the types of references they had. So whether that was a community member or specific faculty or whoever it may be, it was really creating a bias for students who, you know, can only really go to campus and gotta go home, and they don't have time to be part of these other activities on campus or any form of involvement. And so we have it on Award Spring as a blurb, just saying that they're no longer required and the reason for it. And we actually had reviewers who reached out to us last cycle saying, like, this student got a really bad reference from this person. And so from there, I was like, I would rather not put the student in jeopardy because this person had little to no connection to the student and decided to just give a bad reference instead of just declining the reference altogether.
Yeah, we're hoping that that helps increase the number of applications. We also saw that for our non-traditional students, a reference could be a challenge if they've been out of school for so many years. And then there was some favoritism. Like if a reviewer read an application and there was a faculty member, you know, that they know that or wrote that recommendation form, you would see the student get higher points. So this is our first year that we're implementing some of these changes, and we'll see what it does to our applicant pool. But it's fair game. Okay, so where are we at this point? What steps are we continuing? So we continue to support all students. We feel really lucky to be able to say we serve all students, regardless of status. International, DACA, refugee, whoever, returning students, students with that have received a BA, everyone can apply. And we love being able to say that. So again, like Jasmine mentioned, we just have tailored outreach efforts to still reach these pockets of community and encourage them to apply. There's, you know, it's a time where there's some unknowns and students may not feel as confident, especially with financial aid changes or whatnot. We adjusted our scholarship timeline a little bit so that students would at least know if they were going to receive a scholarship from us or not before they even got their financial aid award letter. So that's also helped us retain and convince students to continue or start at the Seattle colleges. When they see that they at least have a $5,000 scholarship and they even haven't received their financial aid notice yet, it helped really foster like some security within them. We continue to work with legal counsel. We work with Stolen Reeves, we work with Victoria. We always have follow-up questions. This is our second year working with them, and even after hearing her speak today, I have follow-up questions for them. A lot of times I tell folks on my team, I don't have an answer for you. I don't have the knowledge behind that, and I have to ask them. So they're on standby, and they probably will be for the next couple years. We are adapting scholarship requirements to these changes. So it feels like every month there's a new criteria that I have to be mindful of that I cannot administer. So we're constantly thinking of, well, this cycle's already open. We'll start matching in April, but we have to start thinking of next year already. Conversations with donors are continuing. We've had those conversations now for our second year, but I think again, folks, we're in this space where nothing's happening yet, and now it's happening. So we have to go back and have a conversation with these donors. That will continue, especially with new gift agreements being formed and making sure that they're informed on what we can and can't offer them through requirements. Editing fund agreements and gift agreements is really tedious. It can be tedious for me to identify them, but it's even more tedious for fundraisers to have to work with donors and edit those, because it's never just one conversation. I feel like it's a series of them, like Tracy provided that example. So we continue to learn and evolve through this time. I wanted to share some examples of what this work looks like and how legal counsel has helped us. One thing that folks ask us are, especially fundraisers, talking points. How do you have this conversation with donors or with partners or folks across the district? And I needed to have something tangible to be able to share with them, but I needed to be sure it was approved by legal counsel, whether what you can say and how you can say and what you can offer. And this is just an example, it's not a template, because something like this would be tailored specifically to your foundation and specifically to the type of fund agreements that you may have. This year, we are going to try using the word underrepresented, and there's still risk behind that. That's not low risk. Underrepresented meaning that it can embody, I don't know if you all can see this language, not limited to racial and ethnic minorities, women in certain fields, individuals with disabilities, veterans, and individuals from low-income backgrounds. That still has some risk, but we're going to try until legal counsel tells me we can't anymore. So we also wanted to know, well, can fundraisers use first gen? Can they use socioeconomic status? So this is just a snippet of about a 4-page document that provides us with some guidelines. And again, this would be something that you would work with to formulate with legal counsel specific to your needs, your foundation, and your gift agreements. We constantly get asked, well, how did you start tracking the issues behind fund agreements? We didn't know where to start. We started from scratch, and we started with an Excel sheet. And this is one of our older examples, but now this has evolved, and it has so many columns. But we started with identifying the fund name, what fundraiser was assigned to that I would need to reach out and say, hey, you know what, there's about 4 funds that I need you to work on. And then what areas of risk needed to be addressed. In the immediate, we started with gender, ethnicity, and age. And I think today Victoria spoke to it. She spoke to it at the executive session, but age is still something that you could potentially make a case for. So it's not completely excluded. There's still some risk behind it. But we have a couple of scholarships that are for non-traditional returning students. And it asks that they identify their age or their year that they graduated.
It's like they had to graduate from high school prior to, say, like 2015,
yeah.
Or like have had to graduate from a Seattle public school between 1995 and 2004, or something like that.
So we have a few, and we've identified those, but there may not be as much risk with that yet as there are with the other two. Listing the language out instead of sending out like the full fund agreement to folks. It helps when I can just go to a fundraiser and say, you know, it's just these 2 sentences here that you may have to work with the donor on. Now we have a column, not in this version, but now we have a column on like, what should that language be? And that's as of this week after we got the key terms approved. Does this fund require revision before awarding? And this has been a really hard conversation to have with folks for me, where it's hard, but I have to be a stickler and say, we can't award this until this is addressed. So we have that documented, internal notes, and then we've shared this with the attorney for their notes and their feedback. So this is probably like a phase 2 Excel sheet that we started with, but I wanted to share that with you all. Again, there's other methods, there's platforms, all kinds of stuff to be able to track, but this is where we started. There were a few questions, and we may have answered those throughout the presentation, but I am happy to take any questions if anyone has any at the moment. Awesome. I think we've gotten a question on how we navigate gendered scholarships. Again, we're going to try underrepresented. Jasmine talked to what questions we deleted. We really cleaned up our application.
Yes, our application used to be about like 50 questions, I want to say, give or take, and we're down to around like 30.
Yeah.
You mentioned that instead of a thank you letter, you collect a bio on a student. Do you collect that in the application, or is that a post? It's a post.
So currently it's in post, just because the fourth spring was like, the main person was on vacation or PTO of some level, so we couldn't get it before the application opened, unfortunately. But the hope is that for next cycle, it'll be part of the application instead of the post acceptance.
Yeah.
This is in the works.
I'm curious, kind of along those lines, what are the key, like, kind of long form questions that you do include? I know you said you remove financial need.
Yeah, so some of the questions that we keep that obviously a lot of them are optional, there's a couple that are required just for sake, is their address, which only we see, and that's because if, you know, we have a scholarship that says like must reside in King County or must be a Seattle resident, whatever it may be, we have those. And then their program, how many credits they are enrolled in, their plans for next year. So do they plan to be at the same Seattle college, or are they moving to a different Seattle college? Are they transferring out of Seattle college within that next year? And that's often always the issue, is that, of course, we want all of our students to transfer to another institution, and if this is just their first stepping stone. But our immediate is, will you be transferring to a four-year institution this coming school year? And so it takes a lot of that. We'll ask for, like, if they have dependents. And again, that's all, like, no, we don't use it as part of our criteria. It's just for reporting, because often the president or the chancellor may want to get that information of, like, how many students are we serving, who are families, how many parents are coming in or coming back. We also have the community engagement, whatever level that is. So it includes on-campus involvement, off-campus involvement, if they're caretakers, if they have a job, work study, and then it lets them describe what the responsibility is. And that's where a lot of them will say, like, I am a full-time mom, or I'm a full-time dad, and I'm not able to be involved on campus, but I do watch my kids when I'm not in class. And then their written statements is probably the bigger point that we really, really try to get students to understand. It's like, everything else could be whatever, that's what I'll tell them. But the most important part will be the written statement. So it's, if you're able to go to a writing center at our campus, please go at least have someone else see it. If you can't, have a peer see it. If they can't, read it out loud to yourself. Because oftentimes you will catch your own mistakes in what you're reading or writing. Because often they just, you know, have a one go and that's all they turn in. But often we'll say, like, just read it out loud to yourself at least, because sometimes you'll catch yourself and you're like, oh, actually that was not what I was trying to say. So those are the things we'll ask for them. And we've removed a lot of other things from, like, what was imported into the system. So a lot of those CTC questions, we hide them, so if they're a current student, that's not something that they're trying to figure out. And that was because we had one question that was it was an import from CTC about their race ethnicity, but it was in, like, in an acronym. And so it was like AA, but we didn't know that that means Asian American or was that African American. And we would go to Award Spring and they're like, well, that's what we have, and that's what's imported from CTC. And then we said, can we, like, describe what it is, right? Like, can we know what AA means? And they're like, you can't, because it's imported from CTC. So we just hide the question, so students aren't asking, like, well, what does this question mean?
We do ask, are they first gen? And that's also for internal reporting purposes. And we ask if they're WASFA, FAFSA, have they applied or plan to apply? And that's also to gauge whether students are utilizing all of their resources. We had one question that we removed, and we noticed students weren't answering, but we have a fund that supports students that have been incarcerated before. And when we inherited the application, it was just a blunt question of, like, have you been incarcerated? And we noticed students weren't comfortable answering that. And we also weren't comfortable asking that, because the student's probably thinking, well, why do you need to know that? And we're moving to hopefully making that scholarship program run, where the designated support services person that works with returning students that have been incarcerated would be able to just pitch that. So questions that felt like a little daring to ask, and we've just learned less is more. Like, the attorneys have really helped us think of that.
Yeah, because the previous, last year's application, like, in the community involvement, it was asking What is the name of the organization? Who is your supervisor? How many hours are you working?
Yeah.
What is the location? If you're a caregiver, what's the name of the person you're caregiving for? Like, we don't need to know all of that. We just want to know, are you doing something? How many hours on average a week, or however long you're doing it? And when was the time that you did it? Did you do it in the last year? Are you continuously doing it now, or was it a one-time event?
We learned not to ask questions that are just gonna become desk data. So if it's just gonna be things that you're asking to know and it just stays there, you should be asking questions that you're gonna use those answers for something, to report, to serve, to outreach, whatever it may be. So it definitely is a more simplified application this year. I think we answered most of these questions, and my only last plug here is that our scholarship application is now open. So if you have any students that are transferring to the Seattle area, our application is open and it will close March 18th. But that concludes our session, and we're happy to take any questions. We're ending a little early, surprisingly. But it's been a long day, so I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. If there aren't, feel free to stretch, take a mini walk outside. But yeah, but thanks for joining us. Yeah, Whitney, did we have any Zoom questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you all.